you don't know what's going on. You've been away for far too long. You can't come back, think you are still mine. You're out of touch, my baby, my old-fashioned baby. I said, baby, 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 you're out of time. Well, baby, 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 you're out of time. I said, baby, 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 you're out of time.
Welcome everyone on behalf of the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics. Very pleased to have you here for this session on geopoetics, land, rewilding and the climate crisis. Apologies first of all for the delay, but it's been a very complicated setup here with the technology. It's the first time we've done a blended meeting. We've always had problems with Zoom, I have to say, but tonight we've managed to crack it, I think, thanks to Alastair McIntosh and Luke Devlin, who are with us tonight.
Okay, well, I'm sorry I'm not there in Glasgow, COVID, etc., but I was particularly looking forward to coming up to do a couple of days road trip to actually go to some rewilding sites and catch up with some rewilding people to bring you state-of-the-art information from places. But because we've opted to do this blended event tonight, I've pre-recorded yesterday my presentation, so hopefully Alastair's going to be able to play that. I've also got a little film made by some students of mine on the theme of rewilding. If we can play that first, that's great. If we can't, don't worry, I can always send it later, and then I'll kind of come back at whenever point and kind of respond to any questions and points, and then hopefully maybe Alastair will then give his speech and then we'll debate a bit and engage, I hope.
I think that's the plan. So you want me to try and play which video, the long one or the short one?
Play the short one. This is made by some students of mine in the University West of England film and media course, undergraduates, and I kind of mentor them in this past year during lockdown, making short films about rewilding. So this is an interesting little example to start with.
Okay, is that working?
That's working.
Deforestation, industrialization and urbanization has been a rapid decline in animal and plant species, with many even facing extinction. It is a complex, far-reaching issue with no simple solutions, but there is still hope. The best scientific understanding tells us that we can take radical action now to end the climate and ecological crisis. But how? We must stop waiting for governments and large corporations who facilitate and are responsible for the climate emergency. We must take responsibility for our own survival and the survival of all who inhabit our Earth. Rewilding is our chance to re-establish areas of ecological importance to their uncultivated state. Rewilding is the large-scale restoration of ecosystems to the point where nature can take care of itself. It encourages the return of threatened or missing species and embraces the ebb and flow of nature, allowing animals, plants, birds and the elements to all shape our landscapes and habitats over time. It is not about condemning farmers for their livelihood or letting wolves and bears roam the streets. Rewilding is also about people. We seem to have lost our place in nature, becoming disconnected and taking too much from the land. Being in nature is essential to our health and well-being, and a healthier ecosystem benefits everyone. Together we can find new ways to live and create a richer, greener, cleaner world. Because if nature thrives, we thrive. There are some ways in which anyone can help. Join the XR Rewilding Facebook page to keep updated on rewilding initiatives across the world. Search for local rewilding groups and projects in your area, such as tree planting, urban gardening. Sign petitions to stop damaging travel and housing developments. Encourage wildlife and biodiversity to prosper in your garden or green space, be it big or small, by introducing food or a water source, planting wildflowers, ditching pesticides, and creating safe places for birds, mammals, and insects.
A warm welcome to you from my desk here in Cambridge, not far from the ivory towers of academia. I'm not going to focus on university. I'm going to focus on, later on in this presentation, a couple of local fascinating rewilding projects. But first of all, a massive thank you to Norrie and the rest of the Geopoetics group, Tina, David and Pat, etc. Those I've met and those I haven't yet met. Also my small involvement on the editorial team of Straveg. It's an honour to be doing this very much in the lineage stretching back to Kenneth White, etc. And of course to be presenting with you, Alastair. That's a great honour. Your work has set me up and constantly inspires. So, a journey of rewilding, a geopoetics journey of rewilding for me, and it's a journey of evolving change. I'm going to talk about kind of three approaches from the world of rewilding. Rewilding as activism, rewilding in practice, and a rewilding journey. They're all going to blend in together, and I'm going to throw in some stories that connect across them. So hopefully in this 25 minutes, half an hour, I'm going to take you on a journey into the landscape, my journey and some of my landscape. So I hope it can inspire. I'm putting this out there to hopefully inspire you and give you some tools, give you some stories, give you some experience and places to go and visit and people to engage with, to keep receiving that spark. So I think we all accept, I hope we all accept that climate ecological emergency is on us. COP is coming up. Alastair, I know, and others there in Glasgow are very involved in that, others coming from all around the country. How can we engage with that? Is the government, our UK government, going to fail? Is it not going to hit a target? How is the world going to respond? So I put forward that rewilding is a tool of that, is a tool of response. I heard a wonderful quote this week from a scientist called Rich Blundell, who's contributed to a new UN report, I think here in Cambridge, and he talks about changing the climate of your mind, changing the climate of your mind. So the wild garden of our mind, wildness. I found this wonderful quote from Thomas Berry. It inspires me a lot. I wish to escape from this re-engineered world into what can only be identified as the wild. Wildness might be considered as the rootedness of the authentic spontaneities of any being. Wildness might be considered as the rootedness of the authentic spontaneities of any being. I love that sense of deep authenticity. I'll talk a bit later about our own indigeneity as part of geopoetics, as part of rewilding, as part of our coming true to ourselves and being activists in the world. I just found a few buzzwords of rewilding. Is quite a buzzword. The term has been around about 20 years now, and a lot of people have issues with it. Restoration, ecology, regeneration. Anyway, radically regenerative rewilding burials, rewilding human movement. The Taurus program as well, a stunning image. I'll talk about that a little later in terms of animal reintroduction, species reintroduction. That's the OROC that the Taurus program are working on. So let's start with some terms. Two terms: a scientific term for kind of the soil ecology, plant ecology of rewilding, and a term for human rewilding. So this first one, the restoration of ecological functions, processes, dynamics, and the connectivity of ecosystems. Ecosystems must connect. If we know that we are damaging soil, we know that we are taking too much land, from other species, from the planet. We're deforesting. We're taking too much land for agriculture, modern industrial agriculture. So we're cutting off ecosystems, valuable landscapes get chopped and changed by our interference. We know that, Rachel Carson onwards. So the human definition of rewilding: to foster and maintain a sustainable way of life through hunter-gatherer, gardener, social and economic systems, including but not limited to the encouragement of social, physical, spiritual, mental and environmental biodiversity, and the prevention and undoing of social, physical, spiritual, mental and environmental domestication and enslavement. And I've put in the brackets, undoing colonialism, or that lovely phrase, unlearning. So the top quote is from a new book just titled Rewilding, Paul Jepson and Kane Blythe. The second human quote is from a wonderful American rewilder called Peter Michael Bauer. I really recommend Peter's work. He does a lot of online courses, and he runs Rewild Portland, where he's based. I just wanted to kind of start with this headline from the BBC News yesterday that really shocked me last night. A rare white deer was shot dead on Bootle Street by police. Because for me and for all of us, I'm sure, during lockdown, we observed nature engaging again into our urban spaces. In Oxford, I saw red kites in the street I was staying in. Here in Cambridge, deer emerging from the surrounding countryside and the fields on all the kind of entrance streets into the city. And the Botanic Gardens particularly has had a kind of colony of deer moving in there recently. And for a lot of us, there's been a real, a new or a fresh or a reinvigorated engagement with nature, which is an essential part of human life, our own mental health, our own well-being. But that sense of, that aha moment of the wild world, the looking at the tree, the looking at the cracks in the pavement with the wild weeds coming up. So the Eurasian lynx, I'm sure most of you will know, there's a project in Kielder Forest to reintroduce, is it 2 or 3 lynx? That was presented to the Tory government apparently on the same day as the Brexit bill finally went through, so they were a little preoccupied with those shenanigans, and this proposal was thrown out. I've subsequently been in on public debates, in public engagement sessions that the team there put forward. It's a very small scale project, very well kind of planned and supervised. It's quite interesting to be in on those things and hear so many people, bringing their fear to the table, their fear of personally being attacked by lynx or domestic animals being attacked by lynx. I think there's still a lot of work that needs to be done on how we kind of engage communities, start small, start building into our communities, and undoing that fear and enlarging that kind of excitement and engagement. Species reintroduction, I'm sure many of you have heard of the wonderful Derek Gow, a fine Scotsman who lives down in Devon at Coombs Head Farm. He's got lynx. He's a big rewilder, species reintroducer, very well known for beavers. His book Bringing Back the Beaver, tremendous inspiration, and I've talked to him about various places he's been successful and places he hasn't been successful. I know in Scotland there a huge amount have been culled recently, and there's ongoing question marks and kind of retaliatory kind of responses by the community. Chris Jones there in Devon as well, very wonderful advocate. I've been on his land and seen his work in creating the space, but just leading them to it, and how they operate in that ecosystem and build their dams. And yes, they cut trees, but that's all part of the process. So we know we must rewild on a massive scale to heal nature and the climate. The UN is telling us, the UN is kind of stepping up into that space as it should, and telling us. So this was just this year, just in June, a massive scale, an area the size of China, to meet our commitments on nature and the climate. The revival of ecosystems must be met with all the ambition of the space race. Yes, of course. Why have a space race when we're in such crisis? So this is the decade of ecosystem restoration. I'm sure many of you know that. Alan Watson Featherstone's been an advisor to that, and is very pro the work that they're doing there, and how we must use our imagination. They're calling for imaginative responses, action that has never been seen before. So will we rise to meet that challenge? Ask me in 10 years. Let's meet again in 10 years at the Pearce Institute or wherever, in a field in as part of the Glen Affric new Rewilding programme. So a little bit about my activism and my stepping up into this area. I've been a filmmaker for the last 20 years, and that's taken me to some extraordinary places, some wild places and some wild people and some tribes and some isolated communities. And that kind of has fed my enthusiasm and my interest and my kind of deep commitment for people and planet. I'm not a spokesman for Extinction Rebellion. I believe in their core aims, and I've been on many actions and many protests, and I hope I will do again. A group of us activists came together after having kind of lots of online conversations around rewilding at the beginning of XR here in the UK, and kind of wanted to underpin it with some kind of deep-rooted soul, perhaps is the word I'm looking for. So we formed a network called XR Rewilding. There's many, as you'll know, there's many networks within XR. You know, it's an extraordinary grassroots social movement, community-led. Let's see where it goes and what else it inspires. Insulate Britain, you'll know, is doing things on the M25, etc. Anyway, coming back to XR Rewilding, we wanted to seed it with a core theme of rewilding the self, the soul, the soil, and society. So we've set up this network, XR Rewilding. You find us on Facebook. I think we've got 23,000 members, but that's just a social media platform. On there's kind of forums to ask, to engage, to meet others in the area. It's a big international forum and group. I can think of a few success stories. Central London area has been seeded with wildflowers. I'm looking forward to seeing and hearing what's coming up in the near future there. In Hull, my university city, someone approached me about looking for help for finding the legal basis to take over and rewild a small patch between two houses that the developers were circling. We gave some advice on that. And of course, lots and lots of urban gardens around the world asking advice about how do I rewild my land, etc. And on the other side, we share information about courses in inner rewilding, places like Embercombe. I'll mention Embercombe in Devon in a minute, which is a rewilding site and very much, focused on the twin track of soul as well as soil. So yes, it's an online community. We do meet occasionally during times on the streets. We'd like to do more with it. Who knows? It's a very very much grassroots activist platform. And something I'm really proud of, a campaign that came out of XR Rewilding, and I kind of took a lead on, is that just the first week of lockdown 18 months ago, a friend sent me a headline in the Times, an article from the Times about the British government reneging on its tree planting programme. And we haven't got to the bottom of it, whether their excuse was the coming pandemic and dealing with that. There's no point getting into debating Tory party financial planning, but it could have been a whole host of reasons. They gave a very muddled explanation of why they were doing it. But nurseries were up in arms about this. 750,000 oak trees grown specifically for last year's annual tree planting programme across the UK were going to be destroyed. And these were local. They were grown by these nurseries. The one we dealt with is in Wales, so they collected acorns and grew them there. Another one in Warwick, another one in the Scottish borders. So a bunch of us got together and said, we can't let this stand. This is nonsense. The order has gone out to kill these living sentient beings, break them up for firewood. We talked to all the nurseries. Lots of interesting stuff came out of that, including kind of a whole conversation over many hours about the history of government tree planting in the UK and what nursery owners thought of that. But this is the biggest ever kind of reneging of a contract, and nurseries, as I say, were up in arms and were going to go bust in many cases. So we talked to the biggest one particularly, that's in Wales, and we said, okay, let's work together on this. Let's get as many as we can and be hopeful of how we can plant them, where we can plant them, and how. And we'll build a campaign. We'll build some grassroots coming together on this. So we did, and over the year we negotiated with that nursery a small price per sapling. They're 2 or 3 years old, in very good condition, beautiful condition. And we bought 80,000 of them. As I say, we bought them. We did get a chunk of them given to us by the nursery in gratitude. And we raised £20,000 in order to buy them and to start the distribution process. So Tash, in particular, amazing organizer, based in Marlow, she got a contact form. This is our website, savetheoaks.org, very simple. And people could donate, but also apply for them. And we asked a whole load of questions about where do you live, how many do you want. I think we set a maximum of 1,000 per asker. The most, were in 5s and 10s, etc. We did work with a few landowners, and we thought very deeply about the ethics of that, and we asked them questions, because of course we couldn't go and see people in this time. It was all done during lockdown time, including getting them out to our distribution hubs around the UK. And just to be very clear, we worked with a team of tree experts and soil ecologists to look at the different soils of the country. So we were very clear about not sending or giving oaks to certain areas that just the land, doesn't support oak growth. And we recommended other trees for certain areas. Very proud that the Langham Moor community buyout took a load of our trees. So I look forward to getting and seeing some of them. So we gave them out. We did it in 2 tranches, 30,000 first time, and then the remainder the second time, with distribution hubs and then mini hubs. And we were very careful about COVID and people coming to places, etc., how they would be handled, how they would be collected. But we devised a very beautiful handout for everyone about planting these with care. We were very clear that we'd stepped into this situation because we wanted these to be kept alive. They'd been grown, so keep these lovely trees alive, but plant them with love, due deference and care. And like a dog is for life, a tree is for life. A tree is going to outlive us. We all know that. So plant a tree, plant many trees with love and care and due sentient kind of ceremony, if you like. That's what we were trying to encourage. And of course, keep that care going. It's been a very dry year down here. Cambridgeshire and the Fens is the least wooded county in the whole country, so I feel kind of in a strange position. I've done my best to plant with care trees in my area, in my indigenous area, but it's a complicated area which I'll come on to in a bit. So that's the Save the Oaks project. I'm absolutely delighted that we set up a campaign team. We've got 80,000 oaks. We can't guarantee that they've been kept alive. We know where most of them are. We ask people to send in pictures and tell us on the map, and we have their addresses. I'd love to spend the winter now going around and seeing some of these oak plantations. Whether that's possible or not, I don't know. But it's been an extraordinary kind of grassroots community action that I'm very proud of, and it's been a great team, and I think we've really achieved something. And the fact that we kind of asked people to apply and we gave them out, and we didn't ask for money. It was not about money. If people were able to donate cash, then that's fine. If they weren't, it didn't matter at all. It all has roughly balanced out. And these trees are spread out all across the land in some private gardens, north, south, east, west. What a joy. It feels a sense of community group activism and co-ownership, of these trees. There's a forest out there. There's a Save the Oaks oak forest across this land. So kind of rewilded, geopoetic landscape of oaks has been created. This just wanted to alert you in terms of activism around rewilding. It may seem a bit, other than this oak campaign I've just told you about. How can rewilding be activist? Because it's so long term. We can protest a house being built or housing development or HS2, for instance. I've been to those camps and been in Jones Hill Wood and seen the destruction there. We can protest against destruction, but how can we actively kind of be activists for long-term rewilding change? Well, here's a very good example. Wildcard has grown out of XR and several other social movements and social groups and NGOs. I have been involved and slightly am still involved, but they're doing extraordinary things. They've got three campaigns. The first one is ask the Royals to rewild. That's what this is about. This is an open letter to Her Majesty the Queen and Prince Charles, asking for huge swathes of land, royal estates, to be rewilded. That letter is on their website. I highly recommend you get involved in that. You can print that out and send that, or alter it a bit. So the first campaign, Rewilding the Royals, and I'll show you a slide in a minute of an action that's about to happen in October. Rewild the Church is the next campaign. I'm not sure where that is, but of course the church is one of the biggest landowners across the land too. And Rewild Oxbridge. Here I am sat in lovely Cambridge, and it's always been said that you can walk from Cambridge to Edinburgh on land I've owned, bequeathed to the colleges by alumni and bought up. Yeah, so here is an active group, an active campaign, and one of the things that they're doing is processing to Buckingham Palace in 2 weeks. Chris Packham is backing it, and a whole load of celebrities have got on board. You may have seen some tweets from Hugh Fearnley Whittingstall, etc., etc. So Robert Watson is involved, former chair of the IPCC, former chief scientific advisor for DEFRA, and he's calling for Prince Charles to rewild some of their estates and send a big kind of signal out to other landholders. So I'm going to come back to landholders and estates in a little bit, because obviously that's a key area in large scale land rewilding. But I said I wanted to say a few things about rewilding here in Cambridge. This is a site about half a mile from me on the Eddington land. Eddington is a brand new university campus, mainly housing for short-term housing for fellows and some key workers. You can included this picture because you can see a crane in the background. It's still being developed. Anyway, there's 2 remaining fields that haven't been developed, and during lockdown, these fields came into their own as dog walking places, as many neighbours just walk there on their own and talk about the great kind of connection that they feel to land there. And it's the only bit of kind of wild land here in the north of the city. There isn't much wild land at all in Cambridgeshire, because it's all being developed because the economic powers that be believe that this is the engine of the UK. I disagree with that. Many people do, thankfully, disagree with that. But these 2 fields, it's called the 19-acre fields. That's the parcel of land. Are scheduled. They have planning permission. Within about 5 years, they will be developed as part of the bigger parcel of the Eddington land. You can see it was recently mown. One day I was there with this beautiful weed patch and weeds and herbs and beautiful things. It's an extraordinary place for foraging all the way around. Walnuts, plums. I've planted some oaks surreptitiously down the side here. The graveyard at the side is the Ascension burial ground, and it's where Wittgenstein was buried, and 4 Nobel Prize winners and many other eminent university fellows. Anyway, the mowing regime, absolutely no need to mow here because it's not taken off for hay, and the content of it wouldn't be suitable for feed. And that morning I went, it'd just been completely decimated, and the place was full of dead mice and shrews. So no care for the wildlife there. There's been sightings of stoats, lots of birds of prey, etc. So a group of us are trying in various ways. There's lots of issues here in Cambridge in terms of land, environmental care, the River Cam and the over-abstraction of water here in the south is a massive concern. I screened the film Waterlight at the Geopoetics conference in Biggar there the other year with you, Norrie, and the treatment of chalk streams here in the south of England. I think there's 107 chalk streams in the world, and like 90 of them are here in the UK, and most of them in the south of England. But we're not respecting them enough. We're not respecting them at all. So what can we do? So water is a key issue of concern, and also access to land, preserving land. You know, those of us that want land to rewild, want to preserve biodiversity corridors and create space for the wild creatures of the world. It's a fight. It's a struggle. A second rewilding project, not necessarily using the term rewilding, but extending a very small local nature reserve here in northeast Cambridge. You can see in this map. I'll make sure you have these slides and you have the links to all these websites. You can see the River Cam here in blue. This is about 2 miles in that direction. There's a Museum of Technology, an old steam museum pumping station, and so in red is the existing Logan's Meadow Nature Reserve with a wild strip of woodland and some wild meadows there, but a group of us led by a wonderful chap called Tony Eva. He might be on this Zoom today. If you are, thank you for this wonderful work, Tony. To extend these, at the moment that field is kind of scrubland, but it's always cut. This field is kind of playing fields and exercise machines. So a big planting schedule is in place. The trees have been bought. The council just didn't want to go ahead this last winter because of COVID. Hopefully this winter there'll be a lot of planting go on there, and I'll take part in that. So it's all about kind of restoring the wetland habitat. Obviously the river floods sometimes. It's extraordinary floodplain. I'd love to see beavers on there. I don't know when that'll be. We'll have to get Derek Gower along. There is a heronry in the trees there, and there's this famous Swift Tower as well. Just moving on a bit, and in fact going an hour north from here up the A1, the Monkswood Wilderness Experiment. Monkswood is just to give you some idea of scales, the Eddington site, 19-acre site. As I said, Logan's Meadow is 1.1 hectares, so very small, but very integritous to the almost to the centre of the city here. Monkswood is 157 hectares, so a big site, an hour north of here and just kind of under Peterborough. Wonderful place to visit, but very key because of its unmanagement and lack of inputs. It was literally 60 years ago. Arable field next to it was actually fenced off and left, and now this organisation Assist, they send in drone footage, and it became well known recently because it's said to be the first kind of naturally J-sown, what's the lovely phrase, oak-dominated woodland in the UK in the last century. So a big success. And I wanted to say a few words about estates. I said in the write-up for this talk that NEP in Sussex is a taxpayer's folly. I just wanted to kind of pick up on that and explain that a bit more, because that may seem a highly derogatory term. I'm just very critical of taxpayers' money going to private estates. Yes, they're moving in an extraordinary direction, and NEP, I have stayed at NEP and I've had a long conversation with Charlie Burrell and Isabella Tree about trees and the value of trees in rewilding projects and planting or not. But it is the use of taxpayers' money. They've done extraordinary work with storks, and that's to be commended, bringing storks back to the UK after eradication in the same way that beavers were. There's also a series of estates in East Anglia that are getting in on this, the Wild East project. So, you know, I commend rewilding initiatives, but there is the issue of, you know, estates getting in on the action and using public money to fence off land. You know, as I said earlier, key issue is people in this, and estates that are private places. You know, I don't need to tell you, the Scottish audience, you know, these estates have been the blight of the landscape. You know, and thank God there's been, you know, community buyouts over the year, and the struggle of that, but the success of that. So anything that engages people, community, you know, we as a species are making the decisions on these predator species reintroductions, you know, and there's something to be said about that. But if it's done as a community, and you'll all know about the big announcement this week on the Afric Highlands project to be run by the Trees for Life. So, and they actually have a psychologist working closely with them to you know, to engage the community. How is the community going to be involved in this? This is it 500,000 acres? I'll also include the website of the Afric Lands. So estates, yeah, they are in some ways pioneering big bits of land, but you know, we need to move away from that model of private ownership, private land ownership to that large extent. How can more people engage in these lands? Rewilding Britain, you'll know, is kind of set up by George Monbioni's partner and is now well run by Rebecca and Alastair Driver and others. Ennerdale is an extraordinary project in Cumbria, the Lake District. Summit to Sea, I won't say too much about that. We know what happened there in terms of the mismanagement of people, etc. So Rewilding Britain pulled out of that. Tree planting, on that theme of, you know, working with anyone on the land. In the Save the Oaks project, I found myself doing so much admin, sat here at my desk, worrying about trees going here, trees going there. Had they received them? Had we received them? When were they coming? Dealing with the money. I realised I hadn't planted many trees myself, and as I say, the opportunities around Cambridgeshire have been a bit limited due to land access. So I saw that the sheep farmer James Rebanks had asked for some trees of us. So I rang James up and said, "Do you need? I can see that you've got these amount of trees, James. Do you need any help planting them?" He invited me up to his wonderful farm, Patterdale, Racy Gill farm in Patterdale in the Lakes. An extraordinary place, and you know, the depth of his writing, you know, is really shining out of him. I arrived within 5 minutes, was helping the lamb, you know, the lambing, and over that course of that weekend, I don't know, I planted 2,000 trees, and you know, we joked that there's a Murray White plantation on the Rebanks farm, but a sheep farmer working the land, yes, working with the animals. I mean, I really disagree with that thing of getting all the sheep farmers off the land. Not, you know, if someone is genuinely working for the stewardship of the land and stewardship of those animals. Yes, it's, you know, sheep farming is a dying world, but there are individuals that are, you know, very, very engaged, very connected, and deeply concerned about rewilding and stewardship for the land. So hats off to James, and really part of that wonderful poetic literary tradition of land. I think I've probably overshot my allotted time, so I'll draw to a conclusion with this lovely quote. I hope I've kind of hinted towards this sense of the need to rewild ourselves, the need to rewild our planet. How do we do this? How do we bring these together in this urgent time of crisis? Rewilding ourselves, thinking about our indigeneity to our place. Where are we really from? Which land, which part of land do we belong to? At some stage we'll either be buried in the land or our ashes will be scattered in the land. So let's think deeply about that connection and bring out our love for that, for our land and our landscape. A kind of deep geopoetical dive into the place, which will kind of replenish and renew our bonds with a place of a rewilded place, a rewilded human, a rewilded land. So just to finish with this lovely quote from Dr. Mick Collins, a lovely friend of mine who is a modern mystic. Mick's written a couple of books, talks a lot about not the Anthropocene, but the Transformocene. We're transforming. We need, as a species, the only chance we have to kind of save ourselves and save our planet, to transform the way we live in the world, the way we are in the world, and our relationship with everything else of it. So we need to awaken a 21st century rewilding imperative through a reimagining of our relationship to life. Thank you, and I look forward to questions and engagement and discussion, and I can send you the presentation and all the references in this lecture. Thank you.
Let me just gather myself a little bit, folks, and connect with what we're talking about, geopoetics, land, and tackling the climate crisis. And I always like to acknowledge my mentors, and there's one, Professor Richard Roberts, that I'm seeing on the screen there. Richard, thank you. And also, Richard, I've been recommending to a number of people the address that you gave that is top of the Geopoetics. I think it's the event page, or whatever it is, but an address that you gave, a splendid address in which you unpack Hugh McDermott's remarkable poem On a Raised Beach. I mean, if ever you needed evidence of the reality of geopoetics in Scotland, it is that poem, which in my opinion is second only to T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets as the greatest poem in the English language. Perhaps I should include Rabindranath Tagore's Gitanjali. Wait a minute. My internet went unstable for a moment there. So if I stop, I'll just pause when the internet goes unstable. We're at rush hour out there now, and that puts demand on things, even using that data. So Richard unpacks the significance of that poem. Richard, I had not, I mean, you know me, I'm full of abysmal holes in my self-learning, and I had not even realized that where he starts off saying, all is lochia, he means that which comes out from birth, the flow of liquids and so on that come out from birth. I had always thought he was talking about lochs, and I had imagination about water and so on, but he's actually talking about the birthing of reality. He's talking about the birthing of reality. And I think, Nori and friends who we've got gathered here, let me just move my camera back onto myself now, if I can manage that. I think that geopoetics is about that birth of a Kenneth White world. It's about the world as poesies or poesies, however it would be correctly pronounced. Richard has told me in the past, and I'm afraid I lose these things. but poesis, meaning in the Greek, the making of reality. So you have this very deep sense that poetry is about the making. In the beginning, God said, "Let there be." And God breathed God's Spirit, the Holy Spirit breathed upon the surface of the waters. You have that sense of breath. You have that sense of speech coming out of breath in the Hebrew tradition of the creation myth. And when I use the word myth, I mean a way of representing deep reality, deeper than our reason alone can comprehend. And so Hugh McDermott and the work of Kenneth White, in my experience of it, opens up a way of knowing the world, of providing us with a world sense by which we come to understand the world through the dynamics of poetics. And by poetics, I mean not just poetry in the ordinary sense, but all of the creative juices, all of the creative arts, all these areas that we touch on within ourselves. So the birthing of a world. And Kenneth White's work broke open on me through Tony McManus, through my friend Ian Ochtred, the boat builder now up in Skye, who introduced me to it. And then through meeting yourself, Norrie, in the early 1990s, when you folk brought Kenneth over on a number of occasions, and he gave seminars in Scotland. I first encountered him in an edition of the Edinburgh Review that Murdo MacDonald edited in 1992, a focus issue on Patrick Geddings. And in that issue, Murdo published the launch address of the Isle of Egg Trust that I delivered on the Isle of Egg with my colleagues, Tom Forsyth, Bob Harris, and Liz. Sorry, folks, my mind is a lion. Liz Lyon, thank you. On the Isle of Egg in 1991. It published that edition, and that edition contained a paper called, I think it was Introduction to Geopoetics. And what always struck in my mind from that was Kenneth White defining geopoetics as a higher unity of poetry and geography. A higher unity, of course, in consciousness, in reality, in being, of geography, of place, and poetry, what comes out of deep time coming together. And very quickly, good friends like Norrie and Tony and Ian Ochtred, recognizing my ignorance in these matters, because my original training was as a science student in Aberdeen University, and then I did an MBA. So I was an ignoramus in these matters until my friend Tess, who was here earlier, Tess Darwin, started introducing me to poetry in the 1980s. And I started to understand that here was a way of knowing things that Kenneth White describes as being shamanic. And by shamanic, I think he means, and I would certainly mean, a way of knowing deep reality, a way of knowing the world, which is about seeing from the inside out rather than the outside in, which is what spiritual vision is about. Now, Kenneth does not often use the word spiritual. Kenneth is quite wary, I think it would be true to say, of anything that would smack of religion. But in my view, his work is deeply spiritual in a very Zen sense, in the sense that Hugh McDermott says, I clasp a rock. It is the meaning of life I hold. I'm misquoting slightly, but words to that effect. I clasp a rock. It is the meaning of life I clasp. these stones go straight through man to God, if there is one. I love his little caveat there, if there is one. It's kind of like Hugh McDermott there is finding that he's having to face divine reality. And yet the rational side in him is kind of pulling him back a little bit, backing him off from it. And I get that sense very much in Kenneth White. I get that sense that he's leading us into the spiritual, though he draws back from it. And the way in which he finds himself to be comfortable with it is in talking about shamanism. Now, I encountered this as we were setting up the Isle of Egg Trust. In those very hard periods, in that very hard period between 1991 and 1994, when the egg community fully took ownership of the trust. But for 3 years, the four of us were holding the baby, so to speak, all is lochia. We were holding the baby, and it was a very hard time because the chances of success were so small. It was such a crazy thing we're doing, taking on landed power. And to receive, to be sent papers like Kenneth White's work on Burns, Boyce and Beyond, and in particular his article, A Shaman Dancing on a Glacier, you will find these in his book On Scottish Ground here, which to me is probably the most important, it is the most important collection of Kenneth's papers. To be presented with the idea, if you like, the legitimization that this was about a shamanic way of seeing and of being and of doing was hugely important in the early days of egg, and not just for me, but for a small number of others too. So let me just share what Kenneth has to say about that. Come in, Sven, yeah, take a seat. So I'm just going to read you some passages from various of Kenneth's papers here to show you why this spoke so powerfully. Callum, would you mind closing the door so we don't get corridor noises coming in? Thanks. He says here, in the archaic context, I mean, what a wonderful name, the archaic context. He's speaking of a poem he wrote early on, and he says, that first poem of mine was a shaman poem. I was a shaman without a tribe. I was a shaman without a tribe. You have a sense of something lost in Scottish culture, long lost, long buried, being uncovered by his realization that he was a shaman without a tribe. If I can move on there, he says, what Chinese Taoist thought offers us is ontological re-sourcing. Ontological, to do with the nature of being, to do with our humanity, resourcing, reconnection with the source. And he goes on here to say it is this idea based on the experience referred to above, which is absent from so much of Western poetry. Returning to it, however confusedly and obscurely, was romanticism, but which is forever present in the poetry of the East. Quote, the ultimate excellence of poetry, writes Yen Yu, China, 13th century, consists in one thing. The ultimate excellence of poetry consists in one thing, entering the spirit. If poetry can succeed in doing this, it will have reached the limit and cannot be surpassed. The word Yen Yu used for the spirit is Jushen, spirit of life, spirit of life. To enter the spirit is to enter the world, the real life, the absence of which Rimbaud was to decry in the West. We are badly in need of poetry that has a world. And finally, because how does this play out? I think this is very different from some of the perhaps appropriated traditions from other traditions. I think Kenneth White's speaking about something very different here. Notice his use of the term spirit in that passage I just read. Finally, again, I am not suggesting that we celebrate any mountain goddess. I am suggesting that we try and get back to an earth sense, a ground sense, and a freshness of the world, such as those men, those Finn men of the Sami countries. This freshness of the world, such as those men, those Finn men knew when they moved over an earth from which the ice had just recently receded. This is the dawn of geopoetics, which those Finn men knew when they moved over an earth from which the ice had just recently receded. This is the dawn of geopoetics, a final sentence in his essay, A Shaman Dancing on a Glacier, dancing on the glacier. So folks, what I am suggesting to you is that in our early work with land reform in the 1990s, also things like the Harris Super Quarry campaign and so on, geopoetics fed powerfully into this. Kenneth White had a poem he let us use in the Egg Trust Manifesto. It's called My Properties. And if I remember rightly, it goes, I am a landowner too, after all. I have 20 acres of it, whatever, 40 acres, whatever, of white silence up the back of my skull. Up the back of my skull. Interestingly, when we quoted it on Egg, we said up the back of my mind. And when I came to do that event for you a couple of years ago, Ronnie, I got on to Kenneth and I said, which is it? Is it mind or skull? Because I'm seeing both. And he said, it used to be mind. And then I thought, skull is much more visceral. Again, Kenneth's desire to be grounded. So where does this tie in with land reform, with climate change? I'm convinced, and this is what I talk about in Riders in the Storm, my latest book on climate change. I'm convinced that we need to reclaim, regain, rediscover, or be re-gifted by that ground sense. And that cannot come about when we are disconnected from the ground. Historically, we've undergone clearance. That's led to a psychological collapse. That renders us vulnerable to the consumerism that drives climate change. And my view is that only community of soil, of soul, of society, as Satish Kumar puts it, only community can reconnect us. And only then is there a hope of being able to face up to climate change and live more simply, because we're no longer driven by the commodification of land, by the capitalization of land. Rather, we're in a situation like some 3% of Scotland now is, with some 500 land trusts, where the people living in a place control their own place. Then I believe we will reconstitute the world. Says Adrienne Rich, my heart is moved by all I cannot change. So much has been destroyed. I have to call my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. Thank you.
Okay, Alastair, thank you very much indeed. Yes, Burns Boys and Beyond. And I do recall going on a bus run one wintry November up to Rannochmoor, where George Wiley erected a, what do they call them again? The spire, a spire which he planted on beside the road at Rannochmoor. But before that, Kenneth White at the Goethe Institute on the Saturday. It was a weekend event, mainly organised by the Scottish Society of Artists in 1990. And he gave that talk. And when which is now part of On Scottish Ground, which itself is now part of a new book which has come out from Edinburgh University Press with three sets of books in it. And the thing about it was that when White stopped speaking and ended on that note that Alastair mentioned, the whole place sort of erupted. It just exploded into people, raising points, and it went on for at least half an hour. The discussion following that amazing lecture, because he talked about shamanism in his childhood when he was going up the back of Fairley near Largs, and it is a wonderful essay. So I think it's really significant that what Alastair has said, that Geopoetics inspired him and the community of Egg to take ownership of their own island and of their own lives. So I think at this point we should open to questions and discussion.
Thinking that often the climate change and the big change that's required for survival is so overwhelming and huge. But I think people forget that often that it's small things that can be done as well that build up into the big things. And I'm a member of a local sort of Friends of a Park, and we've got more land that the council's giving us to make change on it. It used to be a donkey paddock and an animal corner, so that's gone, and there's a chance maybe for allotments, but to do other things as well. And I think the council looks to that group to change things within the park that they don't have the resources to do anymore. But and I think the more knowledge people have, maybe there's different kinds of change that can be made rather than traditional flower beds or just beautifying, but looking. And I think the group is probably at that point where it's been doing things for years, making things nice and looking after it, doing weeding, planting. But I think it's now looking to do more maybe significant, but also thinking more about what's planted, all those small things, small questions and actions that might help and change the way, what I think Alastair was talking about, changing the way people think, so that it's about individuals thinking in a different way about small things and then the big things about the planet.
Yeah, very good.
Could either Richard, Screen, or Sarah, who I can see live in front of me, can you give me a thumbs up or down if you're hearing okay? You're hearing okay, thank you. Okay, that's great, it's working.
Do you want to follow on from that?
Yeah.
Because, vegetable gardening is becoming really important now. We, mainly through Birgit's interest in gardening and the hard work she's done, we're practically living off the fruits of her labour in our back garden, the veg that she's grown. We had kohlrabi last night as part of a meal, along with carrots that she had grown. It's maybe not everybody's in a position to do that, but let's say if you've got a community garden in Paisley, why not? I mean, you have to protect the veg as well, because the birds get it and all kinds of things can happen, but you can have coverings and so forth to protect what you're growing. I don't know if anyone else is interested in that side of rewilding in a way, but controlled rewilding.
Could you say who you are for people?
All right.
Who is the person that just, could you just say who you were? So.
Yeah, my name's Caroline Watson. I live in Paisley.
Caroline Watson, yeah.
Hi, I'm Leela Soma. I'm just going back a bit to James's presentation. First of all, thank both of you. The presentations were wonderful. I'd really like to hear more of James's, especially the one he talked about the lynx, reintroducing it to the Kielder forest, I think, and why the bill obviously still didn't get through. So I would really like some, if he knows anything, if he's there just now, and if he could explain it to us. And I know that he did say it was on the same day as Brexit, I think, so perhaps things were overtaken. I also liked Alastair's wonderful point about reconnecting to the soil, the soul, and the being. And I think that is something we have lost as corporate greed has taken over, whether it's Scotland or whether it is in any of the third world countries. So simple act like what Caroline said, rewilding our own gardens. We're doing that now in our own house, not cutting the grass, leaving some wild bits of flowers, etc. It's a small way of getting the bees and insects back. So that's all I have to say. Thank you.
I think we'll let James come back about the links. So
James.
Yes, so that's it is an extraordinary project. I know that they were also considering a site north of Knoydart, and yeah, I'm not sure what's happening with the Scottish one, but it looks as though the Kielder group are really pressing on. I think they're going back to Parliament soon. I'll try and find the link to that. It's a tremendous group, and I did also mention in the presentation that Derek Gow, if you're interested in beavers and lynx, Derek Gow is your man to look at that. He's now got lynx on his farm in Devon. It was a farm and now it's a rewilding centre called Coombs Head. Well worth visiting and well worth checking in with what Derek's doing. He's a real pioneer in making the case. So I think it's going to be an uphill battle in the communities, and I say that because I was witnessed some of the community public engagement events in Kielder and Northumberland, and there's a lot of opposition, which is understandable, but they're working hard on that. Like 70% of the questions were about, will a lynx kill me if I walk through the forest? So a lot of work to be done. It's yeah, but big change. I didn't get to say about the Taurus project, which is actually genetic engineering of aurochs in Switzerland, I think, funded by Rewilding Europe. So let's start with the lynx and let's see if we get some aurochs.
Can I come in? Yes. I think I wanted to raise a question about the language that we use and the difficulty around the term rewilding, and how do we address the challenge of getting the language right to actually help forge connections and stimulate conversations between people who do have different perspectives. So I'd say probably here in Wales, the very term rewilding is quite contentious and divisive. And to achieve the changes we want at a landscape scale, it involves doing kind of radical things with, political things like, changing planning systems and legislation, but it also means working with people. And people who own and manage land. And I'm very conscious that here in Wales, you're talking about people who a few centuries ago were tenants of estates and have managed to kind of carve a living out of the land. And through successive what they would see as kind of progress, really, using techniques and passing farms on from generation to generation. And the very concept of rewilding for them psychologically really goes against the grain, really, because they're custodians of pieces of land that has been handed down, over generations. And for them, you mentioned NEP and estate rewilding projects being seen potentially as a form of colonialization, but I think for many landowners, the very concept of rewilding is a form of colonialization, and in some areas, particularly where it's being advocated, perhaps more so by people who have actually moved in to areas to live. I think it's a real problem, and I think it starts with actually the language that we use, and it kind of concerns me as somebody who's an advocate of the whole concept of rewilding. I just feel it's a barrier. The language you're using is a barrier. Rewilding feels very different from using language like making space for nature. And I just feel a little bit sorry that we've become kind of locked into terminology that is actually problematic in terms of achieving the outcomes that we want.
Can I come back on that? I think that's a really, really good point. And I did address it a little bit in the part of the presentation, that rewilding has become a very political word where restoration ecology or regenerative agriculture or regenerative practice might work better. There's a whole body of work on shifting that dialogue. Also in Wales, the Summit to Sea project initiated by Rewilding Britain, unfortunately was a complete failure, because Monbiot, etc., and Alastair will have an opinion on this as well, basically said, let's get all the sheep farmers off the land. And it failed. And Rewilding Britain are kind of upfront about that. I had a long talk with Alastair Driver about it, and they've pulled out. And I think I know that it's going on in a new guise, and they've employed some interesting people, and they're bringing in artists. Sorry, I've got a dog barking in the background here.
A rewilded dog.
Oh, Lev is very wild. You haven't met him yet, but you will. So yeah. I was going to conclude the presentation on the new project announced last week in Glen Affric, which is very different to the experience of Sea to Summit, because they're actually working with communities, and it's about people. It's about working with people first as well as land. It's still the early days of this project, but I know that they've brought a psychologist in to kind of devise structure, and it's not about incomers very, very strongly. So I totally hear you. It's a difficult thing. I think now is the time to kind of really unpick some of that stuff, and it is political. And I also hear you about incomers doing it. That's why I'm in my home place of Cambridge, trying to work on this in tiny little pockets of land, and trying to persuade the Ivory Tower that not to bulldoze over everything, and have little pockets while feeding them and making hopefully biodiversity corridors. I do go on a bit about that in the presentation, and it's here it's the economic driver of the country. So it's a very difficult call, but we have to learn from examples like egg, etc., and small scale, big scale. I hope that went some way to respond.
Alastair and then Cathy. It's a difficult point.
Could I just add in there, James, is my sound coming through clear? Yeah. Could I just add in there that I think there's been a very big problem with how the rewilding agenda has played out in Scotland, because a lot of it has come into Scotland from the south in a context that has not had an understanding of land reform and not had an understanding of Scottish history. Therefore, there has been a failure to understand that our primary objective is repeopling, and the repeopling, as we see where there is land reform, the repeopling then does the rewilding, but it's putting cart before horse to have large landowners buying up land in Scotland to do the rewilding, hoping to cull grants in a new wave of money coming through for carbon credits, which incidentally is merely putting back what was once on the land. It's doing nothing to take out all the CO2 emissions that have come from oil, gas, coal, and limestone used in cement. It is merely putting back a tiny little bit of what was once on the land. And the worry expressed in many Scottish rural communities just now is that a bit like when the wind farms come in, this is driving up the value of rural land and making it harder to have community buyouts. So that is why many of us with rural Scottish connections actually see the rewilding agenda as being a threat, because it has failed to understand the power dynamics that have been driving it as it has arrived here. Once communities are in charge, once you get places like Egg regenerating their forests, or what they're doing in Hugh McDermott's home area with rewilding land there, the community doing it, then you've got a very different and a much more, well, a very sustainable way of moving ahead. Does that address our friend's concern, I wonder? I'm afraid I'm having difficulty hearing you because of I was picking up echo. I don't know where that's coming from. Are you getting echo? Or is it just me? It's just me, okay.
Do you want to come back? Yeah, I'm not sure of your name, sorry, I can't see.
So yeah, my name's Eleanor. I'm actually researching in Aberystwyth University, looking into connections between language and landscape, but I'm an ecologist by training. Yeah, I think it's really important that all these initiatives take account of national differences within the increasingly devolved United Kingdom. And I can see that, in Scotland, where, you still have a pattern of large estates, it's less so in Wales. So the individual farmers who are very often, sort of strongly kind of, Welsh speaking, local families who have lived here for generations and who manage to kind of regain a bit of land from estates kind of 200 years ago. It's a different kind of pattern, I suppose. Of course, we still have estates, but I think personally, I think it's difficult to see initiatives like Egg gaining such attraction in Wales. Perhaps it's more a case of trying to work with rural communities that involve the people in villages and towns, but also the individual small landowners, small Welsh landowners, trying to get them to work together at landscape scales to deliver what we want in terms of biodiversity and climate change kind of outcomes. So I think every case is a bit different, and actually I think seeing how NEP is managing to combine rewilding with what seems to be an increasingly successful economic model would actually appeal to many of the small farmers in Wales, because ultimately, they're small businesses, aren't they? They're individual small businesses, and they're super keen on economic outcomes as well as the kind of the cultural aspect of continuing to live and work within their landscapes and communities. So yeah, I think the issue of language and issue of being attuned to different situations at national and local levels is important as we take the rewilding agenda forwards.
That's been a very useful contribution. Thanks very much for that. And I want to bring in Kathy, who's been waiting patiently to.
No, it's fine. No, it was very interesting.
Yes.
So my reflection or question is at a much closer to the ground level. My first encounter with geopoetics and the poetry of Kenneth White was a long, long time ago, probably more than 30 years ago, when I read Kenneth White's cycle of poems called A Walk Along the Shore. And I was completely blown away by it. First of all, because I felt it really described the country that my country. But the other thing, another thing that struck me about it was that it was so precise and so closely attentive. There was an attentiveness, a real observation. And I, ever since then, you know, I think that the ability to observe closely is absolutely fundamental to geopoetics.
Yeah.
But I think it's also fundamental to rewilding. And I haven't had much opportunity to see any big rewilding, but I have observed some on a small scale on the Ross of Mull. And it's incredible, you know, fencing off an area that had been, you know, had sheep running on it and everything. And just seeing, and deer, you know, just seeing the incredible difference in a very short time. And the, you know, just the that came as a result. And I think sometimes, you know, looking at things like that, the much smaller scale, which is really just basically looking at your garden, you know, and you know, you can do that in a back court in the middle of Glasgow, very easily, and so I mean that there are the big scale rewildings, but there's also something about that's important about you know, social rewilding and social ability to observe and be attentive to the very, very small, you know, to watch a plant or a tree through a cycle or whatever. And I must say, I find it quite distressing that everybody goes around all the time attentive to somewhere else, you know, somewhere on a screen, and not hearing the sounds and not seeing the things that are very, very close. So for me, I think that a key factor in both rewilding and the climate change and geopoetics is, you know, that absolutely close attentiveness and real, you know, kind of respect for what's there.
Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. Can I just follow on that point? Because you've touched on a key element of what geopoetics is. It's not just a world outlook. It's not just an inspiring vision of what the world could be, which it is, but it begins with perception of the world and how opening all our senses and our minds to what is out there, what is there, and also how we're also attentiveness to how we're responding to whatever it is we're coming across. And it's just as valid in an urban context as in a rural one. And this is a point that sometimes is lost, that people think it's only about connecting with nature as if it's something outside of ourselves, but humans are part of the natural world, although they have done their best in some cases to alienate themselves from it. So I think that is a very, very important element and a key element of geopoetics. It's a way of perceiving the world and expressing the world creatively, in both in all the arts and in the sciences and in our thinking. And I think part of that attentiveness and that involves engagement with other people who we live amongst. And you know, it's not a straightforward process in my experience. It's not like all the community, as the person who was speaking earlier was saying, you know, not everybody welcomes change. In fact, a lot of people don't want any changes. They will resist it. And so you have to engage with folk. And you try to empower a community, but a community is not a homogeneous group of people. There are all these differences of opinion and differences of background and all the rest of it, so it's not a straightforward, well, let's all just engage with the community and everybody's going to be happy. So I think you've touched on the key element, but it is, how do you relate to the people that you live around? How do you explain to them what you're after and listen to what they're saying and try to find a way forward by whether it's a compromise or whether it's in some other way, everyone is beginning to sing from the same hymn sheet. So I think that's a key element of geopoetics, and in relation to rewilding and in relation to the whole problem of the climate crisis. We have to begin where we stand and take it from there. Other points? Luke, have you?
Point, a slight disembodied point. Sorry, is that okay to come in from the kind of virtual world?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Lovely to hear you, Vicky. Nice to hear. I can't see you, but lovely to hear
really
you. Know you here.
I'm not very well, so do forgive me that I haven't got my camera on. I just want
Vicky is a wonderful academic with a specialist in Joseph Beuys. For those of you that don't know.
Oh, thank you, James. I think really I have to kind of, this is more an intuitive feeling or zoning in on a number of things that have been said. I really appreciated, Alastair, your explanation of why you have real reservations or real issues around the rewilding agenda. And I have to say that it's also very much a sense of how these things are done. So if we are talking about a decolonisation process, then the wisdom that we seek surely should be from the people on the ground in those places, you know, as you have sort of mentioned, those communities who had those knowledges about how to care for their places and spaces, and whose knowledges were run roughshod over. So I think my sense is just that it's the way in which that agenda is pursued, and in the current context, political context, it's all very, it strikes me as very sensitive. And there's something about, at the same time, you're going back to creation myths, or going back to Kenneth White as a kind of way of forging new worldings. You know, this agenda that we have at the moment of finding capitalism and all the Anthropocene as too big stories. They're stories that are too big to deal with what we're facing in a way that we can barely enter them. They're important tools to understand what's brought us to this point. But that moment of where you're sort of thinking, what kind of new worldings can we come by plugging into that primal energy? I'm sorry, I'm bringing a lot of things into the space, but I think it's just bringing us to that place of the wound, as Beuys would say. Yeah, sorry.
Indeed. I think, Victoria, I'm sorry, I'm controlling my hearing aids at the same time as I'm.
So sorry.
So it's quite complicated. That's why I was getting echo. I was doing the wrong thing on my hearing aids control. When you're talking about the wound and plugging into deep energies, you're really touching on the shamanic stuff there. And that is not uncomplicated. And I'm very aware of Richard Roberts because of the influence that he has been on me. And Richard, I'm just wondering, I mean, you've looked a lot at this. You've looked at shamanism a lot in the modern world as a professor of religious studies, or the sociology of religion. I wonder if you might have any comment on what we've been discussing here. Unmute.
May I join? Yes, thank you. Thank you, Alastair, and thank you, James. We've had to piece together what you've been saying, but it's been great once you started speaking straight to camera. The issue of shamanism is a very, very interesting one. For me, one of the key things is a shaman figure going on a journey on the part of a community, and as it were being licensed to, as it were, explore on the behalf of a community. I think that it's one of the powerful things in the sociology, particularly the sociology more than the anthropology of shamanism, is that people who are keen on rational modernity have great difficulties with something that unleashes what is not rationally controllable. And the argument is that if you don't have a community in which the shaman can, as it were, relate to the community and live in relation to that community and be held by the community as well as holding the community, then you're in deep difficulties, that then you open the door to forces which are not going to be containable or benign necessarily. So I think the discussion that Kenneth White has of shamanism is fascinating, but I think it has to be reinterpreted, regrounded in terms of where we are at the moment. And I think as this discussion has progressed today, we're actually getting closer to the point of what the agenda was today, where we bring geopoetics and climate change and community and land ownership, bringing it together. And it's taking a bit, but we are getting close to that. And I thought the wonderful contributions from Wales, having spent last week in Snowdonia with an old Welsh friend, that the pressures in the different parts of the United Kingdom are very marked. So in Scotland, when I look north from Stirling, when I go to the top of our local mountain, Ben Ledi, it's a small mountain, and you see waves of mountains going beyond, there's a sense of infinity. When you're in Wales, you have the Romans there, the Normans there, Edward I there, the whole place has been enclosed and held, whereas in England, we've got something different again. So the question of actually, what is the community? How do we relate to it? How do we live in terms of that dynamic? I think is incredibly important. And I think we're getting there in this discussion now. We're getting there. Thank you.
And I think, Richard, that's where the Scottish bardic tradition is so important and interesting.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. Yes.
I was recently up on the Isle of Skye, where the traditional poet Miles Campbell, who had a poem he wrote in 1994 called "And So Somersault," which is about a night away in the fairy hill. So basically he gets thrown off his horse and he tumbles into the fairy hill and he goes through heaven and hell in the land of fairy until eventually taken to the temple. And it moves into a kind of Christian redemptive scene with the mighty waterfall coming out of the book of Amos coming out. And the point about somebody like Miles and Skye and the two young tradition bearers, Ian McKinnon, one of our own former human ecology students, now a lecturer at Coventry University. You'll remember he was one of the people you tutored. And also Catherine McPhee, who is an archivist on Skye. These two younger tradition bearers were connecting in with this stuff. But the point was, and what made me think a lot about your point, Richard, in this, is that these folk, they are all coming out of a very deep Gaelic tradition. They're not having to take it from Native America or anywhere else. They're perhaps inspired by that, but they've got it in their own place, and they've got their own culture's way of holding it. I think more widely in Scotland, the church has played that role at its best. The Iona community that Cathy here was the leader of until just recently. The Iona community gives a holding context for this. And so one of the questions is, as the American Quaker Parker Palmer would put it, how can we create spaces that are hospitable to the soul? How can we create spaces in which the soul can emerge, but in which we are counterpointed with each other, so we don't lose the plot and bring discredit to the whole thing?
Thank you.
Could you pass the mic?
The microphone's being passed back. Let me switch back over here. And
no,
okay, it's not being passed back. Cathy, do you want to come back in on that? No. Anybody else? Anybody else in here was appointed? Those of you on screen, raise your hand if you want to say something. Let me switch over to gallery mode. Yeah, we've got everybody on screen, so I can see you in gallery mode. If anybody, knowing I can see you in gallery mode, if anybody's got something they want to bring in.
No. No.
I think Sarah has a question in the chat. He was saying.
Okay, could you, I can't access the chat, I'm afraid, but if you could raise the point that's in the chat, please do. Or could someone who has access to it?
Are you muted, Nori?
Hmm?
Are you muted?
I don't know. No, is this muted or?
I'm sorry?
Is this?
Oh, who's trying to speak?
No.
I can't see who's trying to speak now. Can you see them?
There was a female voice, and
Yeah,
she
no,
said,
I don't think I muted anybody.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sarah, maybe you could unmute yourself and ask the question.
Sarah, she is muted. Let's ask her to unmute. There we are. Ask her to unmute.
No, I thought there was somebody in control of the chat, which is why I didn't. I thought some guy said was anyway. Never mind. Yeah, so I wanted to ask about the tree planting schemes that the government's launched in 2019, the British government. James, if you could tell me more about that.
All lies, absolute nonsense. Don't believe a word of it. There has been allegedly some money put into different, but basically all the tree planting in the UK was on hold for 18 months. The Woodland Trust. The Woodland Trust was actually hacked. Their whole system, there's only so much I can tell you, but their system was hacked just before lockdown. So they were on the verge of going bust, basically. And there's a whole dirty politics around tree planting. My friend Rob Newby, who was on the call earlier, he's an expert in this, and I can put you in touch with Rob. So yes, there's slush fund money coming out, but I think we've demonstrated that on a community level, on a big scale as well as small scale, you know, Bridport, Cambridge, etc. There's lots of small scale community initiatives going on, and I mean, you need money when you buy 80,000 trees, but on a small scale, you don't need that much to get a few trees. And don't forget, I've been out this morning dropping them, collecting chestnuts from my local chestnut tree that I'm going to plant. I've got a whole kind of little mini tree nursery here in the garden. I've got two of my favorite possessions are trees grown from Wistman's wood and Dartmoor. I don't know if anyone, hope people know that. It's a sliver of ancient woodland that were grown from acorns collected from there. So yeah, I would recommend people grow trees, connect to local tree planting groups. There are some funds, but you know, just do it. Yeah, we can talk more about that, Sarah.
Yeah. Okay then, thank you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. We only have about under 10 minutes left, so
5 minutes.
Five minutes before.
My phone battery is dying and I will lose my hearing.
Okay, so we've got 5 minutes. Any urgent points anyone wants to make, either in the virtual world or here in the Pearce Institute in Govan? I mean, just to say a word on behalf of the atheists who are members of the Scottish Centre for Geopoetics, like myself, and I suppose Kenneth White, I think he is, but it's a broad church, Alastair.
Kenneth White is patron of the Glasgow Trust
Yeah.
here in Govan. I don't know what you're doing out on the islands out there, but here in Govan, Kenneth White is anchored. And
Okay.
it was wonderful when he was here last, because we took him to the
Yes.
Govan Old next door to here, and you should see him looking, the picture I've got of him looking at the sun wheel. He was just blown away by what's in that church next door here. If any of you have not seen it, do go.
Yeah. Well, and so that's a good point to I think the important thing is we've had this useful discussion. We could discuss the myths and the fairies and God and all these other things if we had the time. But I'm sure that discussion.
Come on, Nori, let's start talking about God. God.
Yeah. Okay. So that conversation will no doubt feature in the future at some point. But thank you, everyone, for coming today, especially those who've made the effort and come to Pearce Institute here in Glasgow. Very much appreciate the fact that you've contributed tonight, and especially also to the many folk who have joined us on Zoom. And we've had our problems, as we usually do with Zoom, but I hope as many of you as possible have have managed to listen in and see as much as we could. We will follow this up. We always record the event, and we will edit it and put it out as best we can in the future. And everyone who has signed up and registered for this event on Eventbrite will get the link to the recording. And those of you, if you put down your email address here, then you will get a follow-up message about the recording of tonight if you want to dip into anything again from that. So I'd like to finally thank James Murray White down in Cambridge in his home territory, and Alastair McIntosh in his home territory here in Govan.
Luke Devlin, did you mention Luke there?
Yeah, I didn't mention Luke yet, but Luke Devlin, who from the Centre for a car, yeah. So Luke Devlin was supporting us on behalf of the Centre for Human Ecology and the Govan Folk University, and he has helped us a great deal in setting up this event. So thanks to Luke as well. So with that, we'll close the virtual conversation and the real conversation, and I hope the conversations will continue in the future. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Nori. Thank you.